Hi, I'm Courtney at womenlivingwell.org, home of Good Morning Girls, and we are reading through the Bible cover to cover, just one chapter a day. So this week you completed your reading in Isaiah chapter 6 through 10, and today I want to take you to the throne room of God, because no matter what is happening in this world, no matter who is the ruler, the king, the president, whether we're in the midst of a pandemic or a war, whether the stock market is soaring or crashing, our God is still on his throne, and he is the King of Kings. And sometimes things in our lives are scary and hard and difficult, and we can give way to fear, especially as we scroll through our social media and the things that come into our feeds. It can feel like maybe God is on vacation, but he is not. He is still on the throne now. And as we look at God's word, when we look at the book of Revelation, we know how the story is going to end. We know that in the end that God wins. But sometimes we need more encouragement, right? And so today we're going to look at Isaiah 6 to get a glimpse of God on his throne, to remind us that we can trust in him. So let's go to Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. It says, "In the year that King Uzziah died," Isaiah is speaking, and he says, "I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." Okay, first he's giving us a date. In the year that King Uzziah died, that is when he had this vision. He says, "I saw the Lord," and it is a vision, and he sees God sitting on his throne. Now, if you look back to chapter 5, you see that there's a lot of chaos, that the Israelites are rebelling against God, and judgment is coming. And yet, where do we see God? He is sitting on his throne at peace, even though all of this is happening. And he says that he is high and lifted up. You know, even though the Israelites refused to obey him and refused to lift him up, God is still on his throne, high and lifted up. And it shows his splendor, that the train of his robe, he's wearing a robe, is filling the temple. You know, a bride, oftentimes she will have a train on her dress that just makes her dress more beautiful, more special, more glorious. And that is what the train of God's robe is doing, is showing his majesty and his splendor. And it says, "Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory.' And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke." Okay, these angels that are flying around the throne of God and calling out, "Holy and holy, holy," are not like the pictures that we see of little chubby babies, right, floating on clouds. No, these men are mighty. It reminds me of when I used to live in Chicago. The fighter jets called the Blue Angels used to fly in formation over Lake Michigan every Labor Day. And so me and a bunch of my college friends, we would go down to Lake Michigan and we would watch as these fighter jets flew overhead, and they were so loud that it was like the building shook. And so when I think of these angels, I think they're more like these fighter jets, these blue angels, than they are like the pictures that we see of angels today, because they are strong and they are mighty as they cry out to each other. The temple is shaking. We serve a mighty God. And so when Isaiah sees this vision, when he sees God's throne, he says, "Woe is me." And he says, "For I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips." You guys, when we see God as he is, we self-reflect and we say, "Ooh, wow, I am really ungodly," right? And when I think about the ministry that I do, that I speak, that I would make a YouTube, I'm reminded of all the ungodly things that have come out of my mouth over the years, that I could even be used by God. It is only by his grace. I need his forgiveness, and that's exactly what Isaiah needed. And so it says here that one of the angels picked up a burning coal and flew to him and touched Isaiah's mouth with that burning coal. Now remember, it's a vision, so Isaiah did not get injured or hurt, but it was a picture of purification, that God was giving him mercy and forgiveness and purifying his mouth, because he was about to use him, right, to be his prophet to his people. And then God says, "Whom shall I send?" And Isaiah answers very quickly, "Here am I, send me." Wow. Do we live that surrendered, that when God is saying, "Who can I use?" do we say, "Here I am, God, use me"? Or are we like, I think I'd rather take the weekend off and watch some Netflix, right? No, he says, here I am, send me. And immediately God says, go. And so there's no 4 years of college. There's no seminary for Isaiah. He immediately is given the mission to go to his people and speak the truth. And yet this is a hard mission because he's going to be rejected. And it says here in Isaiah 6 that only a remnant would remain after God was done disciplining Israel. And so we come to verse 10 in Isaiah, and what's so neat is we begin to see prophecy, right, that is going to be fulfilled in Jesus. There's over 300 Old Testament messianic prophecies that are fulfilled in Jesus. And we're going to look at a couple of them in a minute. But I just want to mention that there's a man named Peter Stoner who calculated the possibility of one man being able to fulfill just 48 of these prophecies in the Old Testament. And he calculated that it would be the chance of this, the probability of this is 1 in 10 to the 157th power. Basically, there's not much of a chance that this could happen without the sovereignty of God. That Jesus, it shows us evidence, because we cannot see God, but we see evidence that our God is real and that his word is true through fulfilled prophecy. So in verse 10, Isaiah is told to speak and to say that that their ears would be heavy, that they would be blind. He would blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Okay, so this is a prophecy he's making. And when we turn ahead to John chapter 12, verses 37 to 41, Jesus is speaking. And he says, so that the word by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled, he said, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart. And he says, Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him. Isaiah said these words of Jesus that are now Jesus is speaking because he saw his glory. So who did Isaiah see sitting on the throne? He saw Jesus. He saw the second Godhead of the Trinity. He saw the Son of God, the pre-incarnate Christ. So this is called a theophany, when Jesus appears in the Old Testament. So he saw Jesus on his throne. Now, as we go forward into chapter 7, we come to verse 14, and where they're asking for a sign. And he says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. Now, a lot of us have heard that verse, right? And that's spoken in Isaiah 700 years before this prophecy would be fulfilled in Matthew chapter 1, verse 18, when a virgin gives birth and names him Immanuel. And so we see in Matthew chapter 1, verse 22, Isaiah is mentioned, and it says, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. And so he is referred to. You see, so many times we as Christians want to just camp out in the New Testament because it seems easier to understand. But it is so important for us to study the Old Testament because it brings the two together. It helps the New Testament to make sense when we study the Old Testament. And so I commend you for doing the work of studying this book of the Bible. It's not easy. As a matter of fact, as you look in chapter 7, right before that verse, in verse 8, he talks about Ephraim being taken captive by the Syrians, and they are caused to go and live in Samaria. Now, this verse here, it's verse, what is it? Verse 8. I mean, I know it's not really the point of my video, but I just want to point out that in order to understand who the Samaritans are, you know, the story of the Good Samaritan that Jesus tells, in order to understand them, that one little verse tucked in chapter 7 explains where the Samaritans came from. Ephraim is a tribe of Israel. So the Israelites were taken captive by Syria. They moved them into the land of Samaria. And then the Israelites intermarried with the Samaritans. And that is how we end up with Samaritans who were very disliked in Jesus' day because they were mixed breeds. Now, when we just read the New Testament and we hear that story, we just, we learn that, oh, they don't like Samaritans. And we're like, well, why wouldn't they like them? In our culture, it doesn't really make sense. But when you read the Old Testament, you see how it came about and how the two come together. Okay, so let's move into chapter 9 because there's another messianic prophecy there. In verse 2, it says that he says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the deep darkness, on them a light has shined. Okay, so when we look ahead to Matthew chapter 4. Are you tracing with me? I know I'm all over the place today. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 13 to 16, Jesus is just starting out his ministry. And it is said of him, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. And for those dwelling in the region and the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. And it says so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. So we see another fulfilled prophecy as Jesus comes into the beginning of his ministry. And then we move into verse 6 of chapter 9. Okay, so now I'm back in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And it says, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given. The government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. And who is Isaiah talking about? He's talking about the coming Christ. This is a messianic prophecy, but there's a double fulfillment of this prophecy, or it's a double prophecy, I guess you would say, because not only was this fulfilled through the coming of Jesus being born, but also it will be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom, because the part where it says the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, that has not yet happened. But what kind of king, what kind of governor, what kind of leader is King Jesus? He is a wonderful counselor. He is wise. He is a mighty God. He is strong. He is the everlasting Father. He is caring, and he is the Prince of Peace. When he rules, there will be no hostility. He will bring peace. And so verse 7 says that there will be no end to his rule, that it will never end. And then at the end of verse 7, it says, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. God will do it. This is sure. He will sit on the throne of the universe, and he will forever reign, and no one will take it from him. This is what Jesus was born to do, to come and live and die on the cross for our sins, and then all those who believe will be taken with him right into eternity, and where he will reign forevermore. And his word is true. The fulfillment of these prophecies they authenticate his word. And he is sitting on the throne now, and so we do not need to give way to fear, to everything that is happening around us. Actually, we should be the most peaceful people on earth. We should have peace in our hearts because we know that God is in control. We know how this will end. And we need to remember that kings and presidents and rulers here on earth, they will live and they will die, but Jesus is alive forevermore. And he is not on vacation. He has a plan. And so we can rest in that. We can trust God. And so I always close my videos by saying, walk with the King. But this time, I just want to really mean it. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. He loves you so much. So have peace. Rest in him. And keep walking with the King every day, every hour. He loves you so much. Keep walking with the King.